Well, that's love in action for you. Love in expression. It's wonderful. Well, Edith, as you know or may not know, is going to be performing next Friday night. It's a benefit concert for Covenant House to help the youth of this city and also of the center. And so please tell your friends, come and enjoy evening's music of that caliber, because I know that's how she shows up. Today's sharing this message is about integration. Integration is really a core intention of the teachings of unity and the teachings of the planet's religions. Sometimes people want to get away from the word religion, but it simply means to bind back unto oneself, to unite, to align oneself with oneself. The rest is all just made up around rituals and things that we think that God wants from us. But the Spirit is just Holy One with us, and we are in the process of divine remembrance of that. And so this talk today is primarily concerned with or addressing integration. How that integration happens is very diverse. Even though we apply universal principles to the process of integration, the process of it is as diverse as there are people in this room or people on the planet. And last whole weekend, I was away on the Sunshine Coast at a men's retreat as one small element of integration. And the emphasis was on the divine masculine. I mentioned this last Sunday night when there were 325 people in this room, and I felt some energy from a lot of people in the room. It's just like, well, what does that mean? Divine masculine. Does that have to do with the male patriarchy of the world? That which has exploited the feminine and the resources of the planet? No. Divine masculine is an aspect of divine remembrance and integration. It has to do with the restoration of one's true nature. Since it is Father's Day, I can give just a little bit of time to it. It has to do with something a word really that we don't really give too much attention to anymore. That word is virtue. Dictionary defines virtue as integrity, dignity, honor, decency, respectability, and nobility. This is the underlying divine masculine, the energy of the divine masculine that so often within male psychology is forgotten because we want to get ahead of the other guy, to use, perhaps misuse. That is patriarchy. That is something that I feel is passing away. Thank God for that. Passing away because an age A previous age is passing away. We're talking long-term epochs of time here. But the human race has been going through something called the Kali Yuga age for about 2,500 years. And we are moving out of that into something called the Dwapara age. It is an age that is moving. We're in the transition out of Kali Yuga, which is this age of male patriarchal dominance, and back into a virtuous time of integrity. It's interesting that the word integrity, when I see the word integrity, it aligns with integration, of aligning oneself with oneself. And that it is also said within depth psychology that you and I each have divine masculine and divine feminine within us, regardless of our gender. We are balancing this out because on a soul level, the soul is androgynous. It is not either or. It is both and. It is androgynous. I've always had this feeling to move towards that, to balance these energies of masculine and feminine within self. But when I heard over the weekend, and I mentioned it last Sunday night because the Call of the Forest movie was being shown, and that has everything to do with the perfect balance of masculine and feminine energies. That the problems of the planet have been as a large result of an imbalance in male patriarchy of use and destruction of our naturalness of this planet. And Diana Beresford Kroger was an advocate, and I'm an advocate of this rebalancing, of a bio plan, and we had 400 seedlings that each person in the room could take out and plant, and that would create a whole new bio plan, and that if each one of us did that over time, then this whole global warming thing would be solved through our love, through planting. So, the work of healing that we are engaged in day by day, moment by moment, really, of divine remembrance, you know, that you and I can make a choice at any time to remember our divine origins, and that when we forget, we separate ourselves from the truth of being. Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of the Unity Movement, called it the imprisoned splendor, that the work that we are engaged in, the spiritual work, the spiritual uncovering of the false self, the expose of false thinking, erroneous thinking, into alignment with the truth, is a treatment of consciousness, which uncovers what he called the imprisoned splendor, of allowing that imprisoned splendor to come forth. That you and I are engaged in this reclamation, not only because of the suffering that we've been through, but because of the age of moving out of an age of darkness and shadow and exploitation of women and the land and the planet, to come into an alignment and a harmony with all people and all faiths. This is the work before us. It is a good work. It is a wonderful thing. Do we have our work cut out for us? Well, in a way we do. But it's about the power of love, and it is about the process of integration. To integrate, to be in integrity, with nobility, with respectability, with honor and decency for all of life. It resides within each one of us as the truth of being. In some respects, I'm preaching to the choir here. You know this. But that's why I term myself a spiritual educator, not a teacher. I'm not throwing anything at you or sharing with you that you don't already know. It's just about us getting a fire in the belly and saying, yeah, that's where I stand. You know, during this last weekend, 22 of us went and we had permission to go out on sacred First Nations land. And there was an old tree there in the middle of this little clearing. And people had taken their hands and put their hands on this old tree, and they must have blown paint. You know how you would see handprints in caves? To say, I was here. And there was this process of people checking in with who they were and where they stood within the integrity of their lives. And I can't speak of it much because it was confidential. But my experience of it was that we were in a process of integration. Coming back to the self. What do I mean by the self? Well, it's that which endures. It is your soul. It is that which endures beyond the encasement of the physical spacesuit that you occupy at this particular time, that you have always been, and that we are temporarily here within physical form to remember. I love this word, remember, to bring back members of self into an alignment with who we are. And I came across something that is called a fairy tale. Perhaps the author didn't want to put too much credence on it, but I don't see it as a fairy tale. There are no fairies in it whatsoever. It is a tale of the self and the self. Because the bottom line is, at least in my view, for being involved in these teachings for 45 years now, you take any religious denomination, east, west, north, or south, and you distill it down, it is about integration with the self. The self is who you actually are behind the mind's made-up thinking. So it's called Ego Self, a fairy tale. I'm not going to share it all with you because it's fairly long, but it points to a dynamic that is active within everybody in this room, whether or not you're aware of it. And if you're not aware of it, it's okay. But it is, in my view, a wonderful intention of the universe towards integration and unity. So let me share just a bit of it with you. Ego, self, a fairy tale. Ego has realized that self is returning to claim its kingdom. Symbolically, ego, experiencing fear and panic, frantically barricades the throne room door. Have you ever been there? Eventually, self arrives and knocks on the door, requesting that ego let it in and relinquish the throne. Ego is defensive and refuses to open the door and prepares to take up arms, ready to fight. Ego is prepared to do anything to remain in power, and through the closed door tells this to self. Ego proceeds to try to intimidate self into submission in the vain hope that self will scurry away in its place of exile. However, self rides the storm whipped up by ego, and ego feels powerless in the full presence of self and panics further. What will become of it if self succeeds in reclaiming the throne? Ego fears it will die. It can see no other outcome. Ego is too afraid to surrender to self and does not know what to do. Resolutely, ego digs in its heels and refuses to move. They have reached an impasse. Days and weeks and months go by with the self remaining present and ego locked in the throne room with no resources to maintain its power, becoming weaker. Ego resolves to die on the throne, for surrendering to self will surely only result in this outcome until self throws ego a lifeline. Self begins to speak with ego over ever so gently and with great respect. Ego is stuck by the tone of unconditional love and compassion in its voice, believing it to be the kindest and most beautiful voice it has ever heard. Ego begins to feel very, very weary and overwhelmed with exhaustion and begins to pour out its fears to self, who listens with great compassion and empathy. Ego feels an inexplicable sense of trust as each of its fears are validated by self. Ego begins to consider the possibility of opening the throne door, yet again is overcome with fear of the consequences, as much as it wants to trust. For it is so tired, it is afraid, believing self will betray it. Ego pours out these fears to self. Self hears ego's fears and with the greatest tenderness and compassion makes a promise. It assures ego that its life will be safe and offers a written promise with a golden seal, which stands for absolute integrity and authenticity. Self slides the document under the door for ego to consider. Do you get the process of this? Of how our own mind and soul are continually interacting in terms of integration and the possibility of surrender? Ego fell to the floor with great sobs and said to self, "Yes, how very great has been this burden." There was a moment's pause, and then self spoke to ego in a most compassionate voice, saying, "My dear ego, I love you unconditionally and forgive you. Can you forgive yourself? Can you recognize that what you did to others was a result of what had been done to you? Even though this does not justify your actions, it does not make you unworthy. Dearest ego, you cannot know the history of those who have crossed your path. If you stole from someone, now give to someone as or to many. You have many resources. If you abuse someone, help those who have been abused. If you killed someone, now help others to live. Know this: all is forgiven, all is forgivable. You only need yourself to redress your past misdeeds to be free. From that moment on, a harmonious, positive, and true partnership began. Self took its place upon the throne as ruler of its kingdom, with the ego now healed. This is about integration. So this may be a new conversation for some people in the room in terms of the dynamic. But on another level, it's so familiar to us. It is about releasing the imprisoned splendor. Charles Fillmore, in his book 12 Powers of Man, stated, when the ego consciously lets go and willingly gives up its cherished ideals and loves, it has fulfilled the law and is again restored to the Father's house. Now, Charles Fillmore wrote in a time where the Father's house may seem like kind of religious language, but he's really talking about a state of consciousness, of coming back to that house. And what is the house? In the teachings it says also that there is many mansions. There are many mansions. So the house is a house and a place of, once again, consciousness for you and for me. So what's our part? What's our part? It's our responsibility and our responding ability in a joyful way, with a place of expectation of good, not making ourselves wrong in any way, shape, or form, but to allow this process of integration to take place in a good way. And in the unity tradition, we have this thing called affirmations that I'd like to bring forth more and more in our Sunday time with each other, because it gives you an opportunity to participate in the process and also utilize the spoken word. The spoken word is powerful if you feel it from within yourself. So I would like to give us an opportunity to say these words together. You ready? I will to will thy will. Together? I will to will thy will. And when I first give this opportunity to people, it's kind of like we're kind of at a funeral. You have to say it with gusto. You have to say it like you mean it. You have to say it like the Spirit of God is within you and that you are uncovering a false identity and returning to your own true self. I will to will thy will. All right, there we go. I am a witness to love. Can you say this to your own soul? Not just because you're in the room on a Sunday service and I'm asking you to do this. Is this something that you can own? I am a witness to love. I allow love to heal and to integrate me. I allow love to heal and integrate me. I am a spiritual being, living in a spiritual universe, governed by spiritual law. Do you believe that? I think we should, get up and, sing a really... Get that energy moving, I believe. You know any gospel tunes? I believe. Oh. So, your homecoming work this week, if you choose to accept it, and there's always a choice, the invitation is there. The homecoming work, not homework, but homecoming work, coming home to yourself, is to have a dialogue with your own soul. You are your soul. It's all a question of identification. Personality or soul. And when we allow ourselves to identify with soul, we allow our personality to be spiritualized.